the little kind of quote that will come up later, but I just felt I wanted to share it just now, is that I think will become a theme of this series is, for us, settling questions of provision and protection should radically impact our attitudes and behavior. Settling questions of provision and protection should radically impact our attitudes and behavior. God, may that be so. May this series change us. May we know what it is to be protected and secure in you. Amen. It is now time for all the children to go to Kids Club. And I'm going to ask Chris Roy to come up and join me on stage just for 5 minutes or so. Chris, we've got a seat for you. We thought that in this series it would be great to hear from some people in our church family. It'd be great to hear their story and their journey of Jesus. So if you feel prompted to do that, please come and talk to me and Audrey. We're going to hear from Chris. I've just got a couple of questions for him. Chris, just as we start off this morning, there'll be some people in here that don't know you or know your face but haven't had a chance to have a chat with you. So why don't you start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Stuart. Good morning. So I'm glad that Audrey kind of clarified that maturing disciples means that it's growing within your discipleship in Jesus, because I was slightly offended when Stuart asked me. Honoured, it was confusing, honoured but offended that he'd asked me to do this morning, because normally I don't get a microphone. I as many of you know, I kind of play in the worship team. I play drums and put me at the back of everybody, and I'm not allowed to speak, and that's for very good reason. So I believe Andy's probably sitting with his finger over the mute button at this moment in the sound cupboard. So I'll try and keep it brief, which is not easy for me. It really isn't easy. I come from Linlithgow originally. My mum and dad still stay in Linlithgow. My mum turns 80 next month. I have a brother who is a couple of years younger than me, and nothing like each other, as most siblings are. And I've been coming to St. John's. I was thinking about this. Stuart kind of sprung this on me on Friday night. And I try not to overthink these things, which is really, really difficult as well. Because I've got a real habit of taking something very, very small, and the more I focus on it and think about it, the bigger it gets until it becomes this all-consuming mass. So I've really tried not to think about it too much. But absolutely. So I'm kind of guessing now I'm like 2.5 minutes in, so I've only got 2.5 minutes left. I'm doing pretty well. I was thinking about this, and I've been probably coming to St. John's on and off for probably about just over 30 years, believe it or not. And to kind of summarise that, the reason I've been coming for over 30 years, I was getting introduced to a couple of new people that were coming around by Andy Clark, and he said, "This is Chris. He's part of the church, and he keeps trying to leave, but we won't let him." And that kind of sums up my relationship with St. John's. And my journey isn't to faith isn't unique. It's not the hardest way. Everybody's journey to Christ is equally as amazing as the next person's, and so I don't try and glorify my journey, but my journey to Jesus was through a disciple of Jesus, and I was going to try not to name and shame Ricky Steedman, but it's out. So we used to have long discussions. I've known Ricky since I was maybe about 15, 16, and we're still friends today, thankfully. Maybe not after this, right enough. And we had long theological discussions in cars and about faith and about God and various other things. And, Ricky had become a Christian quite early on in life. I just did not see that this was any kind of way of life. I had this preconceived idea of what a Christian was, that I had to be a certain way, behave in a certain way, act in a certain way, know certain things, and there's no way. So I used to dip my toe in and out coming to church. In between all that, I developed quite a liking for drugs and alcohol, so much so that and I was unable to control my using of drugs and alcohol. And I spiraled into addiction for many, many years. And all this time, the one person that was always there to help, to pick up the pieces, to be there for me, was Ricky Steedman. That was a constant throughout my addiction. So I got to the stage in life where I was beat, I was down, I really just didn't want to be on this planet anymore, and as I say, I was coming to church, and I'd fallen out with God numerous times. I took my ball and I went home because he wasn't getting me sober, and he wasn't getting me clean. And how is it? There's proof, because I've heard this so much. I wanted proof. Do you know what I mean? I wanted God to appear in some amazing light and transform me into this clean and sober human being, and it didn't happen. So it couldn't possibly be real. So for me, my journey was I found a group of like-minded people, and you can find them in the phone book under A. There's also another A on the end of that, and they don't come and take your car away. But they do offer free recovery. So I started going to this fellowship, and I remember my very, very first meeting with these individuals, and I thought, this is great. I found my tribe, I found my people, and I'm identifying with these people. I'm identifying the way they thought, the way they act, the way they used and drank. I'm thinking, this is great. And at the end of the night, they stood up and said, right, we're going to close the meeting with a serenity prayer. And I thought, oh, God. Not him again. Really? Because, I'm thinking, I can't believe this. But, something, I felt part of. For the first time in my life, I felt part of something. And I stuck around, and I did what they told me to do, which was just keep coming back. Now, towards my end of my drinking and using, there wasn't many people telling me to come back, keep coming back anywhere. Apart from my dealer when I was due money, but that's another story. So I continued on that journey, and I'll speed this up, Stuart. I'm aware that I'm probably hitting my 5 minutes now. Yeah, go on, you go.
I was just wanting to just hear from you just about what it's been like to follow Jesus over like the last year as well, because you've got an amazing story of how God has changed you, which is amazing, and you're a walking miracle or a sitting miracle. But I'm also aware how God has used you to help other people, and I think sometimes we can kind of go back to our past, and it's a bit like what Audrey said about the one and done thing. I'm now a mature disciple, but it doesn't work like that, and I'm just really interested about what God's been doing in your life just over the last year or so.
Sure. Well, I'm glad you stopped me there, because I was on a roll. So a couple of weeks ago, I celebrated 17 years clean and sober through the grace of God. And in that year of sobriety, I'm a member of a small group that we run here on a Tuesday night in the Lowport Centre in the cafe, 8 o'clock. If you have a problem with alcohol or drugs, I think you have a problem with alcohol or drugs, and you're welcome there. Being part of that group, for me, you'll not see me at connect groups or Bible study or much anything else, out with church on a Sunday. And there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is that I firmly believe that I'm called as a follower of Jesus to be in the trenches. And my goal today is to stay sober and to help others to achieve sobriety. Now, the whole point of there's a lot of misconceptions about 12-step fellowships, but Alcoholics Anonymous, oh, there we go. The 12-step program is God-given. There's no two ways about it. It is the main purpose of that program. And I usually introduce myself as a recovered alcoholic, because I'm not in active alcoholism and I don't think like an alcoholic. The idea that it's going to be good to use and drink has left. And my job today is to help others to achieve that. And by doing so, I hopefully lead them to Christ. And that's been my experience. I work with guys, on a regular basis, take them through the 12-step program. I have prayed with Mormons, Brethren, atheists, recovering Catholics, all sorts of people from all different denominations. The disease of addiction does not discriminate. It doesn't matter where you come from, where you're from, and that for me is my calling, and to see people recover and to become valuable members of society again, and finding out who they are through Christ is just it's the most beautiful thing in the world. To see the lights go on in somebody's eyes when finally you can see that person returning to the person that they once were, or a new creation, so to speak. So that's pretty much what I've been up to, or I'm up to constantly.
And I just have a final question. I just think it's been an amazing journeying with you. It's been a privilege journeying with you. I love to see how God has changed your life and how he's used you to change others. And my final question is just about your own walk with Jesus just over the last 6 months or 12 months. What has been that like for you, independent of what you do? What has that been like?
My life is just littered with the footprints of Jesus. I see that today. There's no dubiety. It keeps coming up. Anytime I'm struggling, he puts somebody in my path or something in my path that reminds me how much he loves me. Right from that very first experience I had, back when I first got clean and sober, and I'd come to St. John's, and Keith Short was preaching that day, and he was preaching on the parable of the lost sheep, and that was the moment that I was set free. But I've had lots of those moments, and I've had lots of those moments even in the last 6 months or so. Keith was preaching, it wasn't quite 6 months ago, but a year ago, and he was sharing his experience of his story, where his mentor at the time had told him that, Keith, if you were the only sinner, then Christ would have still died for you. And when you think about that, that is such an amazing thing, that if I was the only sinner on earth, Jesus would have still died for me. That the love of Christ just pours through you, and I consistently get that. As I say, it's usually through people or through other things. I'm really blessed to be part of the Bowness Filling Station as well. First Thursday of every month, I play in a little band there, and again I get to share the word of the gospel through song, and play with some fantastic musicians like Tim Cooper and to name and shame again.
That's brilliant. Chris, thank you so much for sharing with us this morning. It's brilliant to have... Okay. It's wonderful to have you as part of our church family, and it's wonderful to have you as a leader in our community as well. So thank you so much. Brilliant. So welcome to our new sermon series called Maturing Disciples. What does it look like for us to, like Chris, follow Jesus in 2024? This morning, how serious are we about our faith? Or really, that's an honest question. How serious are we about our faith? Is it important to us? And if so, in what way? In what way is your faith important to you? Just take a moment to think about that. I don't think there's anyone in here who would say they don't take their faith seriously. However, I think we all take it seriously in different ways. I also think that all of us have ways that we don't take our faith seriously at all. We have blind spots. We have key parts of the faith, key themes that we ignore because we find it too difficult. We find it too costly. You see, some people take teaching and research really seriously. It's important for us to get our facts right. Some people will say it's all about caring for people. It's all about loving well. Some other people, well, if you're really serious about your faith, it means that you'll give a sizable chunk of your income away. You can't be serious about your faith unless it costs you. Some say you'll give away a lot of your time to good causes, your most precious time, your most precious resource. All of these are important, but I guess my point is that we tend to emphasize what comes easiest to us. What about some of these things that we find more difficult? One of my reflections coming off sabbatical is that we are all so different and we all think so differently. Our lives are very different from each other. We have different socioeconomic backgrounds. We have different ethnicities, genders. We are at different stages of our lives. And this leads to differences of opinion, sometimes strong differences in opinion, which I often get to hear about. However, we can also be susceptible to groupthink. As you get older, and I class myself in that category now, you tend to associate yourself with people that are like you, that think like you. It makes life so much easier. That's why, to be a dynamic church, you need courage. You need courage to think differently, to be cognizant of your blind spots. As Brianne said last week, we have taken on a big community project with 600 people through the building every week. And we've had the courage to talk about issues that affect us all, like sexuality, gender, politics, ecology, mental health. It's so much easier not to talk about these things. It's so much easier to pretend that we all believe the same things. Except we don't. The more I lead in St. John's, the more I realize that there is diverse thinking in almost every area you could think of. There are tribes in St. John's that have been influenced by their theological background and their own personal experiences. We have conservatives, we have contemplatives, we have charismatics, we have liberals, and it sure as heck is hard leading all of these guys. Because we all think differently. Most of us fall under the Christian umbrella and orthodox Christian views. But in order to get things done, it can leave leaders trying to control people's beliefs and behaviors. Except in my experience, it doesn't work. People will generally believe and think what they want to believe and what they think. It's really difficult to get people to change the way they think particularly as they get older. However, I think having a common vision and values is really helpful for us to gather around. And we've talked a lot about that in St. John's, about what our vision is and what our values are. But which values are the most important in a church? And who gets to decide that? How do we reach common agreement? Is it fair, for example, that some people believe it's really important to give to the church and others don't? Is it fair that some people in our church family are wealthy and others are poor? Is it fair that some people give a lot to church and others don't give anything? What does our passage this morning say to help us with these questions? This is Luke chapter 12. This passage takes place in Jesus' journey to Jerusalem during the last month of his ministry. He had recently been in Bethany at the home of Mary and Martha, which was just a few miles from Jerusalem. Jesus is teaching the crowds when someone interrupts him with a request. "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable you are than the birds. Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest?" Jesus, as a rabbi, as a teacher, is asked to arbitrate a dispute. This was common for rabbis. As spiritual leaders, they were often asked to aid in financial, legal, and business matters. I find this interesting because in my 10 years of working for two churches, both in operational and pastoral roles, I can remember only a couple of occasions where I've been asked for advice on financial or legal matters. I've got involved in pastoral care funds, but I've never been asked about what someone should do with their wealth or had a conversation about the moral implications of how that money was earned in the first place. I think this potentially speaks to the dualistic nature of our thinking in our particular context. We have had the tendency to separate our spiritual and physical needs and spiritual and physical thinking in a way that the Jews never did, in a way that the Bible never did, or our theology never has. I think it's important that we start to open up discussion and open up all areas of our lives to God and to God's ways. Well, what can we learn from this parable? Well, firstly, if you didn't know it already, life is fragile. There are no guarantees that you'll reach your 70, your 70 years. In this parable, the man died overnight. There were no long years of taking life easy. We don't know what is going to happen to us. Life is fragile and uncertain. Secondly, wealth is temporary. In the context of eternity, wealth is temporary. We can't take it with us. We need to invest it here in this life. And finally, the parable teaches us to be rich towards God, not towards ourselves. Our focus needs to be on giving to others, helping others above our own needs and wants. So, how do we get the courage to live in this way? Well, I came across a clip of Bill Johnson from Bethel. Just came across it in the last couple of weeks, and he was speaking in May 2022. He was talking about the 12 spies in Canaan when they were given a report to Moses after scouting out the promised land. I was intrigued because this is the story that became the inspiration for our church's journey from the academy to the low port. We talked a lot about finding home. This was the Israelites scouting out their new home ahead of entry. 12 of them. And Bill talked about the 10 spies, the spies that were negative. And he talked about the fact that they spoke truth. In Numbers 13, it says, "We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is the fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large." In other words, there are giants in the land, and we've got no chance. But the two, Caleb and Joshua, said, "This is amazing. God has made a way. Let's go." Same circumstances, different opinion. Faith versus fear. The 10 spoke truth. They just didn't speak the whole truth. They didn't tell lies about the promised land. They just didn't speak the whole truth. Israel knew God had an inheritance for them, but it takes courage to face down mountains. It takes faith to face down mountains. Now, let me be clear. I'm talking about faith in God here, not faith in yourself or faith in your own abilities. I'm talking about faith in God. And I want to go back to the beginning. I suggested earlier on that we have different aspects of our faith that we choose to emphasize. And in some ways, that's fine. Let's celebrate diversity. But in some ways, it's not fine. Because in my experience, people tend to emphasize aspects of their faith that don't require any faith. Think about it. That's oxymoronic. It's a massive contradiction. A faith without faith. Yet this is what a lot of Christianity has become in Scotland in 2024. It's a faith without faith. Hebrews 11 says, without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists, and he rewards those who earnestly seek him. Now back to the beginning, back to the quote from Audrey earlier. Settling questions of provision and protection should radically impact our attitudes and behavior. We need to understand that we are God's and that we are wrapped up in God, and he has us. And our identity is completely secure in him. Chris's story is testimony to that. And if we believe this, and if we get a hold of this, I believe it will really change us. You see, I think our church family has been on a journey. We've been on a journey of faith. We have arrived here. And it's amazing. It's amazing what God has done. It's amazing the money that we raised. It's amazing the people that came around. It's amazing the volunteers that we had. It's amazing the groups that are in this building. It's a brilliant story of faith for St. John's that we've all been part of. But I think what's happening now is God is turning up the dial and he's saying, what about you? What about your life? What are the implications of this for you? What does it look like for you to increase in faith? What does it look like for you to trust more? What is the next step for you to use your time and to use your resources? I have a question up here. I'm just going to read it and then I'm going to pause. I'm going to let you think for a minute. If you took God at his word today, if you truly took Jesus at his word in this passage, how would that affect your behavior? What would you change? If you took God at his word today, if you truly took Jesus at his word in this passage, that is not to worry about your life, not to worry about what you'll eat, or about your body, what you will wear. How would that affect your behavior? What would you change? Let's just take a moment just to ponder that. I think this is what God is calling us into as a church family. As I said, we've seen this play out in the low port. There were people who said this is not wise. Fear masquerading as wisdom. People didn't say, I'm afraid, I don't think we should do this. They said, this is not wise. I don't want to be a fearful church. I want to be a faith-filled church. God's provision and security are the basis of our identity. Settling questions of provision and protection will radically impact our attitudes and behavior. So what specifically is God saying to us today? I find this difficult because I said earlier, we're all coming from different places, backgrounds, and wealth, or lack thereof. However, we've just filed our church accounts for 2023, where our income was £450,000. And in a normal year when I first came to St. John's, it was 200,000. Some of this income was in grant income, but the significant majority came from the church. This represents incredible generosity and sacrificial giving from a lot of our family, and I'm grateful for that. I think it represents investing in God's kingdom as opposed to living for yourself. There is something really special about this church. We come from different socioeconomic backgrounds. We have different ethnicities, genders, and we're at different stages of our lives. But we're all in this together, whether we've made significant financial contributions or whether they've been involved in giving of our time, in practical tasks, or in prayer. But, I think God wants to take us to the next obvious stage. He wants us to trust him more in our individual lives. I think God is saying, you've watched and experienced faith in action in the Lowport. You have seen me bring the council to you and offer you this building. You've seen me give the resources to take on this building. You've seen me bring the right people at the right time. Now, I want you to trust me with your life. I want you to trust me with your insecurities, your worries, your concerns. And watch what I'll do in your life. And watch what the impact of individuals living for Jesus in this community and in your workplaces will do for his kingdom. Let's just pray together. God, I thank you for St. John's. I thank you for this community of faith, a community that is willing to put their money and their time and their resources where their mouth is. God, I think this building is a real, tangible example of faith in action. And now, God, I pray for the individuals in this room. A lot of individuals in this room have had a lot of things to deal with and are really, really struggling. And if that's you this morning, God wants you to know that he knows and he hears that. For some of you, you're scared about taking that step of what God has obviously put in front of you. And God is saying, will you trust me? Will you trust me? And I would encourage each in these groups to come forward for prayer or go up to the back for prayer. Because my sense of it today is that it's one thing watching something happen. It's another seeing God do it in your own life. And that's the offer for you this morning. That's what God wants to do. And so God, we just give this time to you this morning. We just ask through the worship and through the prayer time at the end that you would continue to minister to people. You continue to speak to them and give them boldness and courage to reach out. Thank you for the stories in this building, God. Help us to be more honest about sharing where we're really at. And help us to go forward together as a church family into what you have for us over the next few years. In your name, amen.